Bienvenidos a este espacio ciertamente especial para nuestro Festival Internacional de Cine Silente México, también para Cinema Universidad. Es un placer de verdad estar aquí para platicar sobre un proyecto que nos ha apasionado a lo largo de nuestras ediciones como festival, el proyecto Cinema's First Nasty Women, que es esta compilación maravillosa de 99 películas subtituladas al español que presentan para ustedes a las comediantes del cine mudo y también a mujeres que rompieron, transformaron los roles protagónicos durante los inicios del cine. Para hablar de esta compilación nos acompañan hoy las curadoras, maravillosamente, de forma generosa, van a platicar sobre qué sucede con el proyecto, hacia dónde va, qué podemos hallar en él. I'm super excited to have you here, dear Maggie, Hennefeld, Laura, Horak. Thank you so much for being here and for accompanying us one more year. So I'll present our guests. Voy a presentarles a nuestras invitadas. Justamente, pues también es una fortuna tenerlas al ser ellas investigadoras de reconocimiento internacional. Tenemos a Laura Horak, quien es profesora asociada de estudios cinematográficos en la Universidad de Carleton, en Canadá, directora también del Laboratorio de Medios de Comunicación de las Identidades Transgénero. Asimismo, Laura es autora de Girls Will Be Boys, el libro que puede traducirse como Las chicas serán chicos, mujeres travestidas, lesbianas y cine estadounidense entre 1908 y 1934. También ha coeditado otros libros como Cine Mudo y las políticas del espacio público, y así también pues, es editora de revistas muy importantes en el mundo del cine como Journal of Cinema and Media Studies, y además, pues, por supuesto, curadora de Cinema's First Nasty Women. Maggie Hennefeld, quien nos acompaña directo desde Minnesota, está en línea con nosotros. Maggie es profesora asociada de Estudios Culturales y Literatura Comparativa en la Universidad de Minnesota, Twin Cities. También es autora del libro Espectros del Slapstick y Cine Mudo de las Comediantes, un libro maravilloso que también se publicó en el 2018. Es editora también, coeditora del diario La Revista Cultural Critique y co-curadora también de Cinema's First Nasty Women. Muchas gracias a las dos. Thank you so much for being here. Maggie, Laura, I'll let you, of course, say hello to our audience.
Thank you so much for having us, and thank you everyone for coming and for tuning in today, and thanks so much to Fixelente for being such a great partner over the years on this project.
Muchas gracias, Laura. Nos agradece por estar aquí, por la invitación. Voy a estar traduciendo también al español los comentarios y las respuestas de nuestras panelistas. Maggie, if you can say hello to the audience, please.
Hello, hi everyone. Thank you for sharing with my virtual presence. I so wish I could be there in person. I visited for the festival in 2019, and it was one of the most beautiful experiences of my life. And I'm just delighted to be here remotely, but really, really wish I could be attending in person.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Bueno, dices, Maggie, que estar en nuestro festival en el 2018 ha sido una de las mejores experiencias de su vida. Así también pues, nos has enriquecido, justo nos presentan ustedes a las comediantes. It is because of you that we have known finally all these beautiful comedians from the silent era. So let's start with our panel. Vamos a empezar, tenemos algunas preguntas también. Some of our questions came from our students here in Cinema, students that are taking our Women Film Pioneer Seminar, estudiantes que están cursando también nuestro seminario de pioneras del cine, han hecho preguntas a ustedes que vamos a explorar aquí. So let's begin. Which were the origins of the project? ¿Cuáles fueron los orígenes del proyecto?
How far back do we want to go?
I guess I can start. So my origin story is that when I was an undergraduate student, I got very interested in film representations of trans people and cross-dressing, and it completely blew my mind that there was this whole aspect of film history that no one had ever taught me in a class. And when I saw them in archives, first at Library of Congress, I knew that I wanted to share them with the world. So it took many years and a lot of schooling and a lot of learning and meeting people before I was able to do that. But that's the moment when I knew I wanted to do this project.
Claro, Laura nos comparte que sus intereses por estudiar las representaciones de las personas transgénero, de las mujeres en el cine, fue lo que le llevó principalmente a trabajar, a buscar este proyecto Cinema's First Nasty Women, y también cuando ella llega a sus estudios cinematográficos es que conoce a las personas indicadas para hacer esto, el hacer comunidad. Thank you, Laura. And what about you, Maggie?
Well, my side of the project has a similar origin story. Can I share my screen for a minute? Because I actually have a GIF that speaks precisely to this question.
Of course, and Maggie, compartirnos algunas imágenes. Vamos a transmitirlas.
Oh, now I have to, oh, it's making me put in my password to modify permission settings. I wrote in the wrong password. Here it goes.
Mm-hmm.
Does that work? Oh no, it's not going to let me do it. I have to restart the whole thing. All right, so forget about the GIFs. I was going to share a GIF from a film called Mary Jane's Mishap, which I believe we played at the festival in 2019. It's about a bored housemaid who spontaneously combusts out of the chimney while she's doing her housework. And the absurdity of her explosion provides a kind of alternative to the drudgery of her domestic labor. So I saw this film on YouTube when I was a graduate student trying to decide what I wanted to write my dissertation about. And I was mesmerized. I wanted to learn everything about this bizarre film and the world in which it was made. And then just kept finding more slapstick comedies like it that thematize gender rebellion, experimental play, feminist protests from the early 20th century. So like Laura, I just kind of tunneled into the archive. I was traveling to the Library of Congress, to MoMA, to the British Film Institute, archives around the world, watching incredibly obscure films that you couldn't see anywhere else. And then actually, I first met Laura at a film festival in Bologna when one of the engines on my plane blew and the plane had an emergency layover for 24 hours. So I almost didn't make it to the festival. And I wasn't even supposed to room with Laura, but her roommate got sick and the hotel messed up my reservation. And so fate brought us together. That was how Laura and I first met. And I remember hanging out in the hotel room and just talking to each other about our dissertation research. So however many years and books and articles and burning the midnight oil in the archive later, the project really took shape as a kind of curatorial endeavor at a silent film festival in Pordenone in 2017 when we curated our first big Nasty Women exhibition. And that's also the festival where we met Henry and Elena and Lorena, and that's sort of what brought us all together.
Such great adventures, such great stories, Max. Llamo cariñosamente a Maggie y Max, también somos amigos cercanos. Y bueno, nos cuenta que ella se encuentra con esta película llamada Mary Jane Mishaps o Los Infortunios de Mary Jane. Es una película de principios de siglo en la que aparece Laura Bailey, una actriz talentosísima, cercana a lo que conocemos como la Escuela de Brighton. Y bueno, Maggie queda fascinada en cómo esta película muestra a una persona, una mujer dedicada al hogar, pero que decide mezclar algunas sustancias en la chimenea y sale explotando en 1000 pedazos. Justamente esta explosión tiene tonos de comedia slapstick, y es lo que a ella la atrajo. Se preguntó, bueno, ¿qué pasa con el slapstick hecho por mujeres? ¿Dónde puedo encontrar más películas similares? Y es así que se va acercando a los archivos cinematográficos en Estados Unidos, como la Biblioteca del Congreso, entre otros, y va encontrando estos materiales nunca antes vistos. Posteriormente, Laura y Maggie se conocen. Maggie nos cuenta cómo una de las turbinas en su avión se incendia. Maggie se dirige en esos momentos al Festival de Cine de Bolonia, que es uno de los festivales más importantes en el mundo sobre cine restaurado. Y Maggie nos cuenta cómo al trasladarse en avión a Bolonia, una de las turbinas de su avión se incendia y tienen que aterrizar de emergencia en Italia. Todo esto causa que sus reservaciones de hotel se pierdan, y entonces, conociendo a Laura, Laura le ofrece una habitación en el lugar que ella había alquilado, y es así que se conocen, empiezan a ser grandes amigas y a colaborar en este proyecto juntas. Después, bueno, ya que conjuntan estas películas de las comediantes del cine mudo, se van a Pordenone, Italia, donde tenemos también un festival de cine mudo muy importante, y allí presentan un primer programa sobre las mujeres diversas en la comedia dentro del cine mudo. Thank you so much for sharing with us these fantastic stories about the origins of the project. And once we already know about the beginnings, we have another question. Tenemos otra pregunta from Brenda, one of our students, de Brenda desde Aguascalientes. Pregunta, she asks, how did you trace the path for this research in terms of objectives, methodology, possible outcomes? What did you wanted and what did you not wanted from the project? ¿Cómo trazaron la metodología para esta investigación en cuanto a objetivos, metodología, términos? ¿Qué querían del proyecto y qué no querían del proyecto?
That's a good question. And for me, it's related both to my dissertation, which was on cross-dressed women in early cinema, and my first book. And then the films from that project ended up in this DVD set. So when I saw how much cross-dressing and same-sex flirtation there was in the first decades of cinema, I knew that there was something fundamental that I didn't understand about history, about sexuality, about gender. And so I think the biggest methodological move I made was to watch these films and do research on the context without assuming in advance that I knew what was going on. Because there's a tendency to read everything through the eyes of 2023, or at that time it was when 2000 something. So I did a lot of research also about theater and literature and about sexology and feminism to understand all the contexts in which this was happening, as well as reviews of the films. And I found that cross-dressing was incredibly popular. Like, all the actresses were doing it. The films were popular. They weren't being censored. So it's very different from our idea today of cross-dressing being dangerous or subversive. And so I wanted to share these films that were so broadly popular from the early 20th century, these visions of female masculinity that we don't see very much anymore, with the world. And one of the things we did was bring people like, for example, Susan Stryker, who's a transgender historian, to talk about what these films mean for the genealogy of trans people, for example.
Laura nos cuenta cómo es que sus intereses por las representaciones de identidades transgénero las llevan a la búsqueda de filmes también que hablen sobre las identidades, y es que se va a encontrar que en los comienzos, los orígenes del cine, las mujeres travestidas eran realmente populares en aquel momento. Los personajes representados por mujeres haciendo de hombres eran sumamente populares, estaban por todos lados, y es que va encontrando numerosas películas al respecto. Pero dice Laura, yo no quería presuponer nada, solo metodológicamente hablando me dediqué a ver las películas, revisar lo que iba encontrando y entonces formando ya un discurso. Lo que le asombra también a Laura va a ser finalmente cómo es que estas películas de hace 100 años, más de 100 años, van a relacionarse con los activismos de hoy, los feminismos, los transfeminismos, e incluso la han llevado a colaborar también con historiadoras del cine transgénero como Susan Stryker. What about you, Maggie?
Oh, such a good question. Thank you, Brenda. And yeah, just building off all of the brilliant things Laura just said. Wait, is there an echo? Let me close my Facebook. Are you hearing an echo? I'm hearing it.
No, we can hear you just fine. Yeah.
All right, that's good to know. I'll try not to be too distracted by my own echo. Yeah, I guess my methodology kind of started with my love of comedy and feminist comedy. I see comedy as a space in which women and social minorities can become empowered through risky play and laughter. And my second love, alongside feminist comedy, is of archival cinema. Right? I grew up watching like Charlie Chaplin and Marx Brothers and prostitution films with my family. And then I watched Mary Jane's Mishap, and I found all of these feminist comedies in the archive, and I was able to put two and two together. Something I love that's broadly represented within contemporary culture, like Laura was talking about how queer representation and trans masculinity and unruly gender play are not new things, right? Like they're not novelties of the 21st century. They've been kind of baked into the DNA of American popular culture since at least the emergence of cinema in the late 19th century. And I was finding the same story coming together in the archives of feminist comedy. So that sort of mission to set the historical record straight really started driving my research, and it raised a lot of questions for me, like why were women in the comedy genre messier and more unruly and rebellious over 100 years ago than they are today, where a lot of feminist comedy is taking place more through like spoken word stand-up or the romantic comedy genre, but we have less kind of violent knockabout stand-up, like Leontine electrocuting the police, or the nervous, angry kitchen maid furiously breaking all of the dishes and just smashing them against the wall after her employers criticized her coffee. So that's like the kind of comedy archive feminism research trifecta. But I think once this became a curating project with Laura and Alif Rongan Kainachi, who was also here in 2019, it became so much about collaboration, about making these films as accessible as possible, about collaborating with FIC Silente. Y'all are our project partners. The Spanish language audio commentaries you recorded, your participation, Henry and Tessie, in the anti-racism roundtable, and just like that spirit of collaboration and watching this project just like mushroom to, a scale we had never imagined, because people get excited and they want to be involved. Like that for me has been the most beautiful aspect beyond the kind of lonely scholarly research that we started in grad school.
Thank you so much, Maggie. Escuchamos un poquito de eco por aquí. Ya estamos bien. Bueno, Maggie nos cuenta que la comedia, el elemento de comedia dentro del cine es central para ella. La comedia es un lugar de ruptura, de posibilidad para representar ciertas verdades, ciertas realidades, y especialmente para hallar también las transformaciones del mundo a partir o desde la mirada también de las mujeres, en el sentido de las comedias que ella llegó a encontrar en los archivos fílmicos. Dice Maggie, se ha sorprendido de cómo estas intérpretes maravillosas de la comedia eran ciertamente rebeldes, poderosas en su transformación, poderosas también al momento de acabar con el espacio público, voltearlo de cabeza, confrontarse con las fuerzas policíacas. El caso de Leontine, a quien hemos revisado también en nuestro seminario, pues es algo fascinante para Maggie, porque en algún momento vemos cómo con su batería eléctrica electrocuta a las fuerzas policíacas. Es decir, las mujeres se ponen al frente de las instituciones para transformarlo, cambiarlo todo. Dice Maggie, bueno, es que es algo bien particular que tal vez hoy día, hoy en nuestro presente, no hallamos tanto en el cine. Hay grandes representantes de la comedia en el presente, también mujeres, por supuesto, identidades diversas, pero dice Maggie, me ha sorprendido cómo los orígenes del cine cuentan con todas estas intérpretes que buscan transformarlo todo, también desde los feminismos. Son filmes cercanos a los feminismos. Y dice Maggie, bueno, no nos esperábamos que el proyecto tomara estas dimensiones. Pensando pues en todas las colaboraciones que hemos logrado. Thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you so much, Laura. I have the next question. What was the most surprising discovery that you made while you were researching and collecting all the films? ¿Cuál fue la más grande sorpresa que se encontraron al buscar encontrar estas películas?
It's a tough one.
Do you want me to take that one first?
Sure, I'll think of my answer while you're responding.
For me, we discovered, Indigenous and Black women comedians and cross-dressed women who had been completely written out of cinema history. Lillian St. Cyr, who went by the name Princess Redwing. I found a film at the Museum of Modern Art in New York where she cross-dresses as a cowboy and is the hero, like rescues a child from this like band of evil settlers, and does all of her own stunts, goes hand over a crevasse with the child on her back, and she does this stunt in real life. That film was just totally blew my mind, and I didn't even have a way to see it until we asked MoMA to digitize it just based on the name and based on the description. We thought like, oh, this sounds interesting, but it was a nitrate print, so it wasn't available to be screened in the archive ordinarily. And so that was like a gamble that we took. Like, I hope that this film is worth the money we're paying to get it scanned. And it was just incredible. And I also want to mention Minnie Devereaux, who who's a Black woman who is in many films, many comedies. Not a Black woman. She's another Indigenous woman. There are other Black women that Maggie will talk about maybe. I had seen her in a sort of side part in a, what's her name? Mabel Normand comedy called Mickey, but she actually is the star of a film with Fatty Arbuckle. And again, this was a film that we had no way to see previously until we asked for them to scan it, and we were like, I hope it's good. And it was just incredible. She's like this incredible performer who's so funny and just takes up a lot of space and like, is the center of the film. So for me, those were two great discoveries that both I hadn't really heard of them before I started doing this research, and then the films themselves were a gamble, and they ended up being some of my favorite films of the collection.
Laura nos cuenta cómo le ha sorprendido que, pensando en identidades diversas, también existen filmes que han hallado sobre representaciones de personas afrodescendientes, personas de la comunidad indígena, las comunidades indígenas, particularmente en Estados Unidos. Uno de estos casos ha sido el de Minnie Devereaux, una intérprete que colabora en su momento con figuras de la talla de Fatty Arbuckle o Mabel Normand, pero que justamente son figuras que terminaron siendo desplazadas en la historia del cine y que, a partir del proyecto pudieron encontrar en los archivos, pero también han descubierto, Laura también resultó impresionada de el poco acceso que tenemos a estas películas, y que es importante también reflexionar, aproximarnos a estos filmes, a estos intérpretes de identidades diversas, por supuesto, además de ser de ciertas partes y comunidades de los Estados Unidos. What about you, Maggie?
So this is Minnie Devereaux, by the way. This is from our booklet. This is a still from Fatty and Minnie Hee-Haw, the slapstick comedy with Fatty Arbuckle that Laura mentioned, and it's featured in our anti-racism roundtable in the booklet, which is a conversation that Henry and Cecilia both participated in. So yeah, definitely just kind of building off of Laura's answer. That was a fascinating and crucial series of conversations that sort of emerged throughout the curatorial project, because we were finding films that were at the same time empowering for Black and Indigenous female characters, but also that contained offensive stereotypes and racist cliches that were both at once, that were both feminist and racist in the same film, sometimes within the very same visual gag. And we wanted to approach curating those films as ethically as possible. So we convened this whole panel of BIPOC scholars, musicians, artists, activists to advise about best curatorial practices. And, those films all have content warnings in the DVD Blu-ray set, and there are spotlight essays in the booklet too. Laura mentioned some of these. So this is Bertha Augustus, the African-American comedian who stars in a film from 1907 called Laughing Gas, where she's given nitrous oxide or laughing gas by her dentist and then proceeds to spread her contagious laughter throughout the public sphere. But as a result, her laughter allows her to desegregate white public spaces, including a police station. Her laughter gets her out of jail. So and that's a joyful film. I think that film is actually less problematic than the other films spotlighting Indigenous characters, including Fatty and Minnie Hiha. But I think, we're so, at a festival like Pordenone, where folks are really used to the kind of racist vernacular that crops up in silent cinema, sometimes there's too much disavowal and not enough conversation around what it means when a 5-second blackface gag appears in the middle of a Buster Keaton film. Whereas in the classroom, there's the opposite tendency, just to avoid anything slightly problematic at all. So, that made it more difficult to teach some of these films that might, include problematic images. So we wanted to provide context both to kickstart these necessary conversations in spaces where people are used to watching a lot of silent cinema, but also to bring Black and Indigenous representations from the archive into the university classroom. So I think, I don't know if that's actually my answer to the initial question, but I just wanted to build off of all of the important things Laura was saying.
Y que complementa la respuesta de Laura, también lo sorprendente ha sido que esto ha dado oportunidad, el proyecto ha dado oportunidad de reunirnos y conversar. También nos han invitado generosamente como parte del festival a comentar en un panel antirracismo acerca de las implicaciones de estos filmes que también contienen detalles racistas. Obedeciendo a su época, a principios del siglo XX, racismos en contra de las comunidades indígenas, de las personas afrodescendientes. Laura, Maggie, nosotros en el panel nos preguntamos cuáles son las implicaciones de estas películas, cómo podremos contextualizar en lugar de censurar, en lugar de no presentarlas en la compilación, ¿no? Más bien vamos a exhibirlas y vamos a señalar cuáles son los racismos, cuáles son estas situaciones representadas que deben compartirse, comentarse. Ya nos enseñaba Maggie la imagen de Minnie Devereaux, nos enseñaba la imagen de Bertha Augustus, a quien hemos estudiado también en nuestro seminario, y quien, al ser ella misma afrodescendiente, de forma extraordinaria en la película El gas de la risa, que está también dentro de la compilación, pues vemos cómo desde la risa justamente, ella revienta en risa después de ir al dentista, recibe un gas que la mantiene riendo toda la película. Vamos a ver cómo es desde la comedia a la risa que se desmantelan situaciones muy particulares de las personas blancas en los Estados Unidos. Entonces es un filme ciertamente extraordinario, 1908, que también ha asombrado a nuestras curadoras. So, let's get to our next question. Thank you so much for sharing your surprises. Camila, una de nuestras estudiantes, Camila, one of our students, has this question, really interesting question. What do you think would have been the impact of these comedians in the present if their work had not been forgotten, hidden, or destroyed? ¿Cuál creen que hubiera sido el impacto de estas comediantes si su trabajo no hubiera sido olvidado, destruido o hecho a un lado en el presente?
I'll give that to you, Maggie.
Yeah, I was going to say me. I think the whole history of the 20th and 21st century would have been different if these comedians hadn't been kind of dethroned, like if their power hadn't been taken away within the film industry in the 1920s, when all of the women were kind of kicked out of positions of power in Hollywood, and Hollywood just took over everything. It took over the global film industry. I think the whole history of cinema would have been different if comedians and also female directors, women screenwriters, producers had maintained the degree of power and creative control that they exercised during the very first decades of the history of cinema. It's a joy that we're able to rediscover their work today and really think through the resonances of early 20th century feminist comedy and, queer cross-dressing, queer representation in early cinema, think through those political resonances for our own present-day social movements and cultural crises. And that's the fun, right? And in addition to the films that survive, which we've, curated just a small percentage of in the Nasty Women collection, over 80% of all silent films ever made are now lost. So I think it's equally important, but also energizing to speculate, to imagine the films that don't survive and to imagine them as well, what other, how film history would have been different if they had survived and what they might look like watching them at, a festival like FIC Silente in 2023.
Maggie nos cuenta cómo, claro, podríamos imaginar el impacto que hubieran tenido en el presente si tan solo los varones particularmente, está documentado, toman ciertamente las industrias cinematográficas hacia los años 20 y expulsan a las mujeres. Entonces dice Maggie, bueno, sería maravilloso reimaginar cuáles hubieran sido estos discursos, las películas, si las mujeres hubieran sido integradas en la industria fílmica desde estos años. Dice Maggie, bueno, pero también, claro, es muy grato que en nuestro presente tengamos ya estos filmes disponibles y entonces reflexionemos sobre cómo se conectan también las películas a estas luchas que vivimos hoy, en estas crisis culturales, dice Maggie, que padecemos en nuestros distintos países. Entonces, eso de entrada ya afirma un impacto de las comediantes en el presente. Gracias, Maggie. What about you, Laura?
Sure. I would add, there's a tendency in popular media every 20 years or so to discover lesbians and people with cross-gender identification, and then to forget, and then discover them. We're in the middle of this right now. So I think it would be really different if that could continue to be remembered. So often when people are lesbian or trans or some other identity like that, they think I'm the only one. I don't know anyone else like me. I don't know that this is a way to be in the world that is possible. But if the lesbian scenes, the cross-dressing, the actors who were assigned female who only played male roles, if they were famous and stayed famous and were not forgotten, and this was not just like discovered every 20 years, I think it would make a big difference for many people, knowing that they can live their lives the way they are.
Y para Laura es importante preguntarnos acerca de cómo manejamos el tiempo y nuestras historias. Dice Laura, bueno, es que muchas veces, o a lo largo más bien de las décadas, se olvidan a las representaciones diversas en el cine y luego se descubren, y luego se olvidan y se vuelven a descubrir. Entonces dice Laura, estamos justo en un momento de descubrimiento, redescubrimiento. Dice Laura, mantengámoslo así. Lo más posible, porque se trata de representaciones que pueden guiar e inspirar a personas que se van a mirar en la pantalla y van a decir, yo estoy ahí. Hay personas como yo que han sido así desde siempre. Entonces, dice Laura, bueno, pensemos en el manejo del tiempo y en cómo más bien estos redescubrimientos deben persistir en nuestra memoria. Thank you so much for sharing all these beautiful perspectives, Max and Laura. And Isa, one of our students, has also a question. Isa, otra de nuestras estudiantes, tiene una pregunta. Dice, are there any particular nasty women that you would like to study or research about more, even more that you have? ¿Hay alguna nasty women, alguna de las comediantes que les gustaría investigar mucho más? ¿Alguna en particular?
Yeah, can I go? Leontine is the mirrors. Leontine is my favorite nasty woman. She is the one who electrocuted the local police department, who flooded and incinerated her home simultaneously when her mom asked her to babysit for her little brother and family dog. She's just a joyful miscreant hellraiser, but we don't know the name of the actress who played her. So, you know, we've been going to the ends of the earth to try to find out who Leontine was. We just know she played a character named Leontine she was the star of her own comic series from 1910 to 1912 that was shot in the south of France, but exhibited all over the world. And she was internationally popular. And her comedic spirit, her sort of anarchic spirit is indomitable. And I am so obsessed with her that I dressed up as Leontine for Halloween last year, which created like an internet conspiracy theory that actually I was Leontine in a past life, which I don't think is true. I don't believe in reincarnation, but maybe it is true. But I still want to find out the name of the actress who played her.
Nos cuenta Maggie que, por supuesto, Leontine, que es una figura también que hemos estudiado en nuestro seminario, hemos presentado en nuestro festival, que es esta niña, una actriz disfrazada, caracterizada como niña, que lo destruye todo a su paso, que ciertamente dice Maggie, bueno, es que yo he buscado a Leontine en muchas partes del mundo, archivos, desafortunadamente todavía no sabemos quién fue la actriz que interpretó a este maravilloso personaje que en su momento fue sumamente popular, con una serie completa de 25 episodios desde 1910 a 1912. Dice Maggie que, bueno, finalmente es una figura que le inspira mucho también, porque será esta niña o aparente niña que va a cuestionarnos como sociedad hasta dónde hemos llegado, al punto del nihilismo, al punto de destruirlo todo, quemar la casa, enfrentarse a la policía, etcétera, etcétera. Entonces es una figura que le encanta a Maggie, inclusive nos cuenta cómo ella se disfrazó en el Halloween pasado de Leontine. Si la tienen en Facebook, van a ver estas fotos maravillosas de Maggie como Leontine, y pues ya se está hablando por ahí que posiblemente Maggie fue Leontine en una vida pasada. Entonces, pues es algo que vamos a estar averiguando, a dar seguimiento. Thank you so much, Max, for sharing this. What about you, Laura?
Yeah, I would go back to Minnie Devereaux, the Indigenous woman comedian. I'm so fascinated by her, and I only know about a couple years of her life, but we know that she had a career, a many years long career in cinema at the same time that people were displacing Indigenous people from their land. The Indigenous people who were in films were less and less in films, so there was less and less room for Indigenous people in American public life, and yet she played with some of the biggest Hollywood comedians. She was a middle-aged, rather large woman who nonetheless had an incredibly successful career. I just want to know everything about her.
Y en el caso de Laura, pues dice que Minnie Devereaux es la figura que le inspira, esta intérprete de las comunidades indígenas que pues estaba generando gran éxito al momento en el que en los Estados Unidos estaba desplazando a las comunidades de sus territorios a través de invasiones, asesinatos, etcétera, pero Minnie Devereaux estaba ya en las pantallas de cine. Entonces es algo que le gustaría explorar a Laura a partir de la trayectoria de esta maravillosa intérprete. Thank you both so much. Let's get to our next question, provided by Itzia, one of our students. Itzia, también otra de nuestras estudiantes, quiere preguntarles, would like to ask, which nasty women do you identify with and why? Maybe that is related to the other question.
Can anyone guess what Maggie's answer is?
¿Con qué nasty women se identifican? Claro.
I mean, actually, Maggie is Leontine.
Beyond identification.
That's the secret.
Maggie es Leontine, es un secreto que estamos revelando aquí en Fixilente. Bueno, sabemos entonces ya las respuestas. So
I can add something.
Please.
Someone we haven't mentioned yet that I feel is well worth talking about is Jean Gontier. She's just this incredible women film pioneer who wrote films, directed, produced, ran a company with her husband. She made some of the most popular films. The series that we include in this is called The Girl Spy, where she plays a Confederate a girl who's the daughter of a general who disguises herself as a Northern soldier in order to, win the war. And while it's, politically problematic because she's fighting for the Confederacy, it's just an example of she's like the girl boss of like 1910. She does everything and is incredibly successful at it and is one of the people whose names gets written out of history, even though she was just establishing so much, figuring out what film could do and with a huge amount of success. So I would love to identify with Jean Gontier if I could.
Laura dice que, bueno, en el caso de ella también le encantaría o se identifica con Jean Gaultier. Jean Gaultier, que fue una realizadora, también realizadora que solía travestirse en sus películas. Películas que se situaban en la guerra civil de los Estados Unidos y en las que pues ella hacía de un soldado que se iba a la guerra. Es uno de los personajes que más le fascinan a Laura, Jean Gaultier, para que no se la pierda.
Can I add one thing about Leontine? Because obviously my answer to that question is Leontine. And I'm so glad you mentioned Jean Gontier, Laura, who wrote like over 40 screenplays and was a star, a producer, an uncredited filmmaker, and just written out of the history. I'm sure all of your students know about the Women Film Pioneers Project and are like intimately engaging with it, but it's such an incredible resource. They host our website. They're one of our project partners. And this project would have been impossible without the WFPP. And also all the work Shelley Stamp has done as a historian and curator, like the two Kino sets, first women filmmakers and also African-American pioneers are like such incredible resources that paved the way to the Nasty Women. But just like quickly, like one last tidbit about why I'm so obsessed with Leontine, because her films are really violent and they're really messed up. Like, I'm not saying that, in my heart of hearts, I just like want to like flood and incinerate like my home or the kind of daily spaces I inhabit. But I think there's something cathartic on the level of fantasy about seeing that sort of those violent impulses represented in a kind of lighthearted, mischievous, playful way, because there's so much violence in the world, right? Like our planet is on fire and it is flooding and it's horrific. And we're so exhausted by these unwatchable images of apocalyptic catastrophe. And I think we really need to be able to loosen up the most kind of horrifying aspects of our reality that we know and are just so worn down by encountering. Loosen up those kinds of terrible images through comedy, because it gives us resilience and fuel to survive, right? Like I was just reading that article, Henry, that you and the other members of the collective wrote for the journal Framework on the history of FIC Silente, and you talk about the earthquakes in Mexico in 2017 and turning some of your venues into distribution centers for earthquake victims, and how kind of catastrophe but also community love are baked into the DNA of the festival. So I really identify with that, and I think so does Leontine.
Maggie, y nos cuenta que, claro, no dejemos pasar a Jean Gaultier, que escribimos para el idioma español como Gene Gaultier. Podemos escribirla así e investigarla. Ella directora de 40 películas. También dentro del set DVD Blu-ray de la misma colección de Cinema's First Nasty Women, llamado Women Film Pioneers, o Mujeres Pioneras del Cine, curado por Shelley Stamp. No se pierdan tampoco esa colección en Blu-ray. Y bueno, Maggie dice también, claro, yo quiero hablar más sobre Leontine, porque no solamente me llama el slapstick y la destrucción, el momento en el que quema la casa. Dice, no, en realidad Leontine es catártica. Leontín puede ser catarsis, porque nuestro mundo, dice Maggie, está en llamas. Estamos padeciendo, viviendo situaciones terribles alrededor del mundo. Y entonces, claro, desde el cine, desde la comedia, podemos liberar un poco al cuerpo y entonces reflexionar, repensar la manera en la que existimos en este mundo justo que es tan difícil. Y bueno, Maggie hace referencia también en cómo nosotros como festival también pensamos en proyectos culturales y cinematográficos en Puebla. Nos hemos adaptado a situaciones muy fuertes como el terremoto del 2017 en su momento. Entonces, bueno, por supuesto que ante las catástrofes del mundo, el cine también es una posibilidad para seguir luchando, seguir buscándonos. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Maggie and Laura. And I would like to ask myself a question, a final question for our panel, because we've been talking about feminism and how film curatorship can transform our world. And in that regard, how do you think we can define feminist film curatorship? Or more appropriately, how do you think we can understand it? Hemos estado hablando de feminismos para el cine, para la curaduría del cine. Y les pregunto, ¿cómo podemos definir a la curaduría feminista cinematográfica? O más bien, ¿cómo podemos entenderla?
You asked us at just the right time, because Laura and I are co-editing a massive double issue of the journal Feminist Media Histories on the topic of feminist archival film curating. And we're in the middle of writing our introduction. So we're like sleuthing out the answer to your question in real time. But I think we define feminism and film and the archive so openly, and part of our project is to democratize what we mean by each of those terms as much as possible and in relation to one another. So I think obviously our definition of feminism is incredibly inclusive. And we think of film, where some people, when they're talking about film archives, they really only mean narrative film or feature films made, by a dominant industry within a certain context at a certain time period. Early cinema, some of the films in the Nasty Women collection are more like short form viral TikTok videos than like our image of cinema. And archives are not just collections sort of preserved and organized by state institutions that, you need to have academic accreditation to access. Archives can also be personal collections. And there's so many different materials, feminist materials, that are relevant to consider. Like Diana Anselmo has this wonderful book on the kind of queer history of fan scrapbooks, the queerness of fan scrapbooks from the silent era. So it's a book about film history that's not about the films themselves. It's about the scrapbooks of lesbian fans who, were passionate about filmmaking during the earliest years. So our definition is porous. It's whatever you want it to be. And maybe it will be a little bit more precise in a week from now after we finish our introduction.
Dice Maggie que justamente ahora Maggie, ella misma y Laura están editando el nuevo número de la revista académica Feminist Media Histories, que pueden encontrar también en las redes sociales. Y dice Maggie, bueno, es que para nosotras definir feminismos, cine y archivo, pues es una cuestión abierta. Es una cuestión abierta de búsqueda. Nos dice Maggie, en realidad, pues partimos de esta noción cerrada de que el cine o la película, pues es solamente el largometraje o el largometraje de ficción. Entonces, bueno, ellas están maravilladas, como es que el cine también puede ser, por ejemplo, ese libro que los fanáticos de los primeros tiempos conservaban con recortes de las estrellas de cine, con recortes de periódicos. Más allá de la película, el cine también puede cobrar forma en los artefactos. Entre otras nociones, ¿no? Dice Maggie, entonces nos abrimos a las definiciones y justamente pues forma parte también de repensarnos en las identidades. Thank you so much, Max.
I guess the way I think about it is, what do we as feminists need right now? What do we need from films, from history, from archives, from community? And then how can working with, as Maggie said, the diverse array of audiovisual media from the past get us there. Maggie mentioned that resilience is one of the things we need in the face of catastrophe. So how can knowing about the past, immersing ourselves kind of sensuously in films of the past or scrapbooks of the past, how can it create community? How can it create resilience? How can it create a sense of where we are in relation to history? I think that's what feminist film curating is.
Y para Laura, pues primeramente, antes de definir, hay que preguntarse, ¿qué necesitamos de los feminismos? ¿Qué necesitamos del cine? ¿Qué necesitamos del archivo? Y entonces, trabajar, experimentar, preguntarnos justamente cómo podemos lograr comunidad, resiliencia también a partir del mismo cine. Es algo que le interesa a Laura en estas búsquedas. Thank you so much, Laura. So, I don't know if the audience present here has some questions or through social media. You can also share with us some comments. Tenemos algunos comentarios por aquí. ¿Sí? Oh, Pavel Vázquez through social media is asking, will the Cinema's First Nasty Women have a part 2? Lo repito también, perdón, en español para que lo escuchen la audiencia. Preguntan si Cinema's First Nasty Women, Pavel Vázquez, si Cinema's First Nasty Women tendrá una segunda parte.
My answer is only once we forget how much work it was.
Bueno, fue tanto trabajo que van a revisar.
Maybe.
Tal vez, dice.
We originally wanted 6 discs. We had planned 6, and we have so many more films. There are schemes in the works for a disc 5, which would be more manageable, right, than the 99 film 14.5-hour collection. But like Laura said, only once we've totally repressed how much labor was involved.
Y Maggie nos comparte que, claro, hay películas que quedaron fuera, pero bueno, con los 6 discos que tenemos, tenemos ya una colección maravillosa, van a seguir revisando, ojalá en un futuro. Pero claro, de que hay películas fuera, pues las hay, pero vamos a ver después. Gracias a quienes preguntan en las redes sociales. Vamos a ver si tenemos más comentarios. Pavel Vázquez nos pregunta por qué es tan difícil conocer la identidad de Leontine. Why is it that hard to get to know Leontine's identity? What would it be the reason for it?
Well, she wasn't credited in any of her films. There are no star credits. And the papers I found screenplays, broad scenarios for her films, and a ton of press reviews, most of which are summary or promotion for various screenings. But her name eludes us, right? A lot of materials from the studio survive. The films survive. It's amazing that more than half the films in her series are still extant. But yeah, they don't include any information about her name, her life, her biography. And that's really revealing because that wasn't seen to be important context at the time for sort of situating her stardom, right? It was just her celebrity and not her life or her own power or creativity. So I'll keep looking. We'll find her. We'll find her.
Dice Maggie que principalmente porque las películas de Leontine no tienen su crédito, no tienen el nombre de la intérprete. Dice Maggie que ella misma ha revisado los reportes de prensa, catálogos de las películas, pero estos pues se reducen solo a sintetizar o presentar la sinopsis de los filmes. Entonces ha sido difícil, dice Maggie, que claro, pues esto responde a las convenciones del momento, así manejaban un poquito a las estrellas en paté, pero pues nos promete que va a seguir buscando. Thank you for that promise, Maggie, thank you so much. No sé si hay más comentarios, también aquí pueden hacer más preguntas. Abrimos el micro. Ruth, one of our students from the seminar, Ruth, tienes una pregunta, adelante.
No sabía una
Do you want to repeat it? Did you hear it?
I think I missed.
Knowing what we know now, do we think that the project is making a difference for like students of film?
Que dice en español, nos pregunta Ruth, que ahora sabiendo lo que saben, si piensan que el proyecto ha hecho una diferencia en los estudiantes de cine, por ejemplo, de otras disciplinas.
I mean, I think you would be better positioned to answer that than us, but I will say that I've talked to a lot of people who are using this in their classes, and before, even if you told students, oh, there's this other side of film history, there's all these women comedians, there's all this cross-dressing, if you couldn't show it to them, you know, it would be easy to forget. And so I think being able, hopefully, the basic way that film is taught will change because people can see these. And so we won't just grow up learning about just Charlie Chaplin or just Buster Keaton, but we'll know like Leontine is one of the founding members of cinema, as well as Chaplin.
Y Laura nos dice, bueno, claro, son las mismas estudiantes, los mismos estudiantes quienes tienen la respuesta, pero platicando con ciertas personas, pues sí haya la sorpresa, haya el asombro y el interés, especialmente porque, bueno, claro, también es tiempo de transformar los relatos que nos dicen que, pues de repente solo existe Charlie Chaplin o Buster Keaton, que nos encantan, pero, bueno, claro, es el momento también de abrirnos a otras representaciones e identidades.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. I do think that this collection is changing the way film history is taught, but so did the Women Film Pioneers Project. And, you know, all of the other feminist scholarship and archival curating, both, you know, in-person screenings and physical media like DVD, Blu-ray sets. I think that's massively transformed the way film history is taught in universities and at public events. Like I'm teaching a freshman seminar at the University of Minnesota on silent cinema this year, and I'm pleased to report that there's not a single D.W. Griffith film included on my syllabus because you don't need it. You don't need it for teaching the sort of nuts and bolts of the emergence of film editing, of narrative style, of parallel editing, for example. Just show Lois Weber's Suspense. I screen Suspense and Shoes, and I'm primarily including works by women and BIPOC filmmakers from the silent era, and it's really easy to do now because of all the feminist curating that both includes the Nasty Women Project but also precedes it, and hopefully will follow it, and hopefully a lot of the students in this room will be a part of that.
Thank you. Hay un eco, ya estamos. Bueno, sí, bueno, nos dices, Maggie, que tú misma transformas ahora con lo que sabes tus propios programas de estudio como profesora, como maestra universitaria. Dices, bueno, es que, dice Maggie, yo evito de repente incluir a Griffith en mis programas de estudio porque, bueno, él es ciertamente conocido y pues poderoso dar espacio a las mujeres en los programas, a las directoras, que también nos pueden enseñar sobre edición cinematográfica, el montaje. El caso de Lois Weber en Suspense, pues es muy importante, por ejemplo. Entonces, dice Maggie, yo tomo acción, dice, en mis programas de estudio para compartir con los estudiantes y, pues, justamente generar el diálogo que buscamos. Thank you so much, Maggie. Thank you. Gracias, Ruth, también, por parte del seminario. No sé si hay más preguntas, comentarios. Estamos entonces... Ruth, tienes uno más adelante, claro que sí. One more from Ruth. Which would be the top objective that you would like to achieve with this project? ¿Cuál sería el más grande objetivo, the greatest goal to achieve, el más grande objetivo a lograr con este proyecto?
Complete liberation of all women and gender variant people.
La total libertad para las personas de identidades diversas y para las mujeres, para las comunidades indígenas también.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Maggie busca lo mismo, dice. Ella quiere lo mismo. Muchas gracias.
I was going to say we wanted to start a Nasty Women global empire that would become the dominant structure of governance around the world, but that would have basically the same outcome as what Laura just said.
Dice Maggie, bromea que, bueno, vamos a empezar un imperio de Nasty Women para dominar el mundo. Que claro, bueno, también estaba yo dejando de lado, me disculpo aquí en la traducción, cómo es que justo podemos nosotros buscar en los archivos o exigir a los archivos que se vean estas películas, justamente porque las nociones de curaduría o de acceso en los archivos provienen también de ciertos arraigos con prejuicios de género o de violencia de género. Entonces, bueno, nos invitan a esto nuestras amigas curadoras, Maggie Hennefeld, Laura Horak. It's been a total pleasure having you both here. Thank you so much, Laura, for coming. Thank you so much, Maggie, for joining us. You are deeply missed here.
Oh, I miss you all so much. I really, really wish I was there. My FOMO through the roof and out the chimney.
Te extrañamos mucho, Maggie. Hopefully you can join us in the next years. So you'll be more than welcome in Puebla. Serás más que bienvenida en Puebla. And here in Cinema, School of Film, aquí en Cinema, Escuela de Cinematografía y Medios Audiovisuales. Thank you also so much, Laura. You're also more than welcome here in Puebla.
Gracias.
Gracias a todas, gracias a todos por conectarse y por seguir esta transmisión en Fixilente. Tenemos nuestra clausura más tarde, a partir de las 5 de la tarde, en el Teatro de la Ciudad. Estaremos presentando una retrospectiva de nuestra selección oficial. Lo mejor de estos 8 años de cine silente contemporáneo, directores de todo el mundo que nos han compartido sus trabajos que se desprenden del diálogo y experimentan en múltiples formatos, de múltiples maneras. A partir de las 5 de la tarde, en el Teatro de la Ciudad, primer programa de selección oficial, y después a las 8 tenemos nuestro siguiente programa. Entonces, los esperamos en el Teatro de la Ciudad. Gracias a todas y a todos. Sí, tenemos un comentario. Por supuesto, claro, algo muy importante. Gracias a la audiencia, de verdad, porque estamos aquí en la concentración dura, pero por supuesto, Laura está vendiendo los sets de Cinema's First Nasty Women, los DVD, los Blu-ray. Pueden adquirirlos con Laura, también acercarse al festival, por supuesto. Esa es una venta exclusiva que estamos haciendo aquí en Puebla con nuestra amiga Laura Horak, justamente. Si están en otra parte del mundo, en otros estados de México, también el set pues pueden encontrarlo en Amazon, está a la venta en Amazon para envíos a casa, pero bueno, pues lo tenemos aquí también en Puebla como exclusiva de Fixilente. Muchas gracias a todas y a todos. Listo. Muchas gracias a todas.